Hello and welcome to another episode of Snakes Territory. I am Jesse Friedman, and Jack, there have been riots in the streets in downtown Phoenix because you haven't been on an episode of Snakes Territory in a full week at this point. So good to have you back, sir. Welcome back to the show.
I missed you and I missed everybody else. It's great to be back.
The one and only Jack Sommers, ladies and gentlemen, back with us here on this edition of Snakes Territory. And of course, Snakes Territory is presented by Fox One. Before we get into some Diamondbacks related stuff, we wanted to talk a little bit about this World Series matchup between the Toronto Blue Jays and not the Arizona Diamondbacks, the Los Angeles Dodgers. I'm apparently living in some sort of a fantasy land here in my head. Of course, Jack, this brings back memories of the trade that the Diamondbacks made with the Toronto Blue Jays a few years ago. Daulton Varsho is still a member of the Blue Jays. He was hurt for a good portion of the season, but he went on and to put up pretty good numbers while he was healthy. And in the postseason, he's been a pretty big part of the Blue Jays having the success that they've had.
And I'm really happy to see Daulton doing really well. He's a really good guy, very humble, very straightforward, very honest person. He was always really nice to talk to. I wrote some stories about him when he made the transition to the outfield. He was struggling defensively as a catcher, as a younger guy, and then he flipped into the outfield and almost was elite from almost the very beginning. And so I had some really great conversations, wrote a long article about that at one point back on Diamondbacks on SI. And it was really fascinating to just listen to him talk about the people that helped him figure it out, and not the least of which was his father, Gary Varsho, who was a major league outfielder.
Now, of course, as I mentioned, Jack, we can't help but think about Daulton Varsho and not think about the big trade that the Diamondbacks made with Toronto several years ago in December. Of course, it was Varsho going to the Toronto Blue Jays in exchange for Gabriel Moreno, who's still a member of the Diamondbacks, along with Lourdes Gurriel Jr., who wouldn't have been a member of the Diamondbacks at this point had the D-backs not signed him to an additional contract. So Gurriel, his tenure with Arizona continues. Obviously, he's hurt going into next year, unfortunately. But yeah, this was a fascinating trade at the time, Jack. I thought it made a lot of sense for the Diamondbacks at the time, and I think if you would ask people in the more immediate aftermath of the deal, I guess, and going into that 2023 season afterward, I think the consensus, at least here locally in Arizona, was that the Diamondbacks made a pretty good trade for themselves. Gabriel Moreno was a huge part of the team's success in 2023. He was hitting third for them, in the World Series. I mean, through a big portion of that postseason run, he was right in the middle of their lineup doing big things. But on the flip side, that was not at all to say that Daulton Varsho has been a bad player for the Blue Jays. I mean, especially you look at the numbers he's put up the past couple years when healthy. And he's been one of the most valuable outfielders in all of baseball, in large part because, as you said, he's just an unbelievable defender.
Yeah, it's really interesting to look back at these types of things. In my mind, I look at this as a win-win trade. Clearly, the Diamondbacks, hit a home run as far as what they needed. They had no catching depth in the organization, and they got a Gold Glove catcher out of it immediately in 2023. Gabby's defense hasn't quite been up to that standard the last couple of years, but his bat keeps getting better. And hopefully the pitch calling and all of that comes around a little quicker over the next, 12 to 18 months as well. But Gabriel Moreno has been a tremendous asset for this team, and he's had some really big moments and really big hits. In 2023, Lourdes Gurriel Jr., was all-star caliber outfielder. He actually had his best defensive season of his life, and he was a key member of the team. Now, when I compare these guys numerically, I don't include Lourdes after 23 because there's a separate deal that brought him back on free agency after he was, free to go explore free agency for a month and a half, 2 months. And then he finally signed back with the Diamondbacks, but that's a completely separate deal. So, if you look at the big picture, numerically, it's actually been pretty even. If I look at Lourdes's, WAR production in 23, as well as Gabriel Moreno's WAR production from 23 to 25, and total those up, it comes out to 11.4. And if you look at Daulton Varsho's WAR value from 23 to 25, it comes out to 11.3. So it's
Yeah.
virtually the same value as far as the head-to-head players. What's interesting to look at in the table that's on your screen is how much of the value has been derived from defense on both ends.
Yeah.
So with Varsho, 65 fielding runs. That's based on Baseball Information Solutions. That's up at Baseball Reference. Is it just a phenomenal number? He also avoids double plays and runs the bases well. Because of, despite his power, because of low batting average and OBP, his batting runs are actually -8. And on the other side, you look at Lourdes and Gabriel Moreno. They're 14 for Lourdes, which is a phenomenal number, and 28 for Gabby, 20 of which came in 2023. So they've totaled 42. So both ends of the deal have held up extremely well on defense. And then the last thing to look at is the money. What the D-backs have paid so far to date on this is about 8 million, whereas the Blue Jays have paid 17 million. So it's not a huge difference, but certainly an advantage Diamondbacks. Where the advantage gets bigger is going forward, because
Right.
Daulton Varsho only has one more year left in arbitration. He's projected to make 11 million, and then he's a free agent. Whereas Moreno has 3 years of free agency of arbitration, and he's projected to make 2.1 million coming up in 2.1 to 2.4, depending on your source, coming up in 2026. So I look at this as a win-win situation. I mean, if you just want to look at a value calculator, the D-backs should come out ahead, both in total WAR and in dollar value, or value above replacement from a dollar standpoint. But it's not a huge margin.
Yeah.
And the last thing I'll say on this is, like, the one big thing that people have always pointed to is, hey, Gabby and Lourdes helped get the D-backs to a World Series. Well, now Varsho's done the same thing for Toronto. So that kind of evens things up a little bit too. So anyway, not saying that Blue Jays won the trade or anything like that. This is a classic win-win trade. Toronto was dealing from a position of strength. They had Alejandro Kirk, and Danny Jansen, and they've done fine. Kirk has been equally valuable as Moreno over the last 3 years, maybe even more so if you include all the framing that you show over at Fangraphs. So, I think that Toronto got what they needed out of it, dealing from their strength. The D-backs dealt from their outfield depth, and they got what they needed out of it. And every trade should work out this good.
It is interesting that now, I mean, the Diamondbacks could really use Daulton Varsho now. The traffic jam that was in the outfield is not really there anymore. I mean, obviously Corbin Carroll is firmly planted in an outfield spot for a long time, but as we've already discussed, Alec Thomas and Jake McCarthy, those guys struggled this past year. It doesn't seem all that unlikely that one or both of those guys could be moved in the offseason. Also, with Lourdes Gurriel now being hurt, that opens up a spot in left field. So the D backs could use a Daulton Varsho at this point, Jack, but they also can use a Gabriel Moreno. I mean, if he was not on this roster going into 2026, then that would be a really big question that we would be having year in and year out, is how are the Diamondbacks going to solve the catching position? And it feels in general that finding a long-term solution at catcher, maybe that has a little more value than finding a long-term solution in the outfield. Outfielders, I think in general, are just sort of easier to find. It's easier to plug a hole in the outfield than it is at your frontline catcher spot. But at the same time, I mean, Daulton Varsho, Jack, he's more than just plugging a hole. I mean, he has really emerged as, when healthy, a really, really good player. I'm looking at his 2026, Jack, and wondering if he could go out and have like a 6 WAR season. I mean, you and I were chatting before we hopped on the air. You called him like a WAR cheat code, where he puts up absurd WAR numbers because of his crazy defense. If he were able to combine that with decent offense, which I think there's some decent offense in there. I mean, he hit 20 home runs in 71 games this year. If he can get the on base percentage up 20 or 30 points going into next year, He could have a 6 or 7 more season, and then I'd be fascinated to know what the offers for him would look like next winter. I mean, that is a really, really valuable player.
Yeah. The one thing I'm surprised at Varsho, he was a really good bunter. And I always thought that one thing that was going to help him was his ability to get down a bunt, drag a bunt, and go run up the first base line because he's fast.
Yeah.
Um, you know, and keep his batting average and OBP from sliding when he's slumping. But he hasn't really done that much. The team's just no swing for the fence. I think personally, I've talked to players about this. They can't help it. They look up at the board and they know their numbers. They know their batting average, and it puts pressure on them. And I've always believed this. Like these fast guys that could lay one down, stretch out a hit, get on base, contribute that way. It just takes so much pressure off them when they're in the middle of a slump to actually do something positive like that for the team and with their numbers. And I always thought that that's something he could and should utilize more.
Yeah. Well, for those of you wanting us to declare a firm winner, D-backs or Blue Jays in this trade, I think we're going to leave you disappointed. I think Jack and I both kind of land on the win-win as being the final conclusion here. I will say, in agreement with what you said earlier, though, Jack, that there is still more time. I mean, Daulton Varsho has one more season. Gabriel Moreno has 3 more with the Diamondbacks. You figure maybe the D-backs take a lead on paper if Moreno goes out and has 3 great years. Certainly that could happen, but as of right now, this seems like a great trade for both teams. And hey, both teams get a World Series out of it, which is really the ultimate goal at the end of the day. We've got a whole lot more to get to in this show. Jack, was there anything you wanted to add on that?
I just want to say that if you asked either GM, either team, whether
Yeah,
they would do that trade over again, they both say yes.
yeah. Yeah, that is a great point. And I mean that's the best judge for whether a team has sort of won a trade or won their end of a trade is would they want to do it again? And I think the both front offices, both fan bases, I think would totally agree. Yeah, you would do that trade again. There's no way the Diamondbacks make it to the World Series in 2023 without Gabriel Moreno doing what he did. And I imagine Blue Jays fans maybe feel similarly about Daulton Varsho this year, even though he was hurt for a good portion of the season. He's been great in the postseason, and certainly as the World Series approaches, we're just about 24 hours away. I imagine D-backs fans will not have a hard time deciding who to cheer for in this World Series. It is probably going to be everyone. We are all Canadian for the next few week or two as this series plays out. So, and obviously Daulton Varsho, former Diamondback, that gives everybody a player to be rooting for along the way. Somebody that people around here are familiar with. So yeah, certainly wish Daulton Varsho all the best. Hope to see him do some big things here in the World Series coming up. We have a whole lot more to get to in this episode, Jack. I know you wrote recently about some big off-season dates. There's a roster crunch looming in the not too distant future. We'll dive into that as well. But before we do that, it is time for our DraftKings player spotlight. Well, Jack, here in just the past few days, the Diamondbacks had several players named Silver Slugger finalists. None of these were surprising on my end at all whatsoever. Corbin Carroll in the outfield, Ketel Marte at second base, Geraldo Perdomo at shortstop, and I know you've done some digging on each of their cases, Jack. And it seems like all 3 guys should be in a pretty good spot.
Yeah, I mean, if everybody's got it right, I think that all 3 Diamondbacks should respectively win the Silver Slugger. There should be 3 of them when they do the presentation next year at Chase Field.
Yeah. And the D-backs also were received a nomination for the Offensive Team of the Year for the National League. That is also something they're doing. They're one of 3 finalists there. Jack, I feel a little bit less confident about their ability to win that team-based award.
Yeah, I mean, they might have had a shot, had they not made the moves that they made at the trade deadline. The team overall was better. The defense was better. The pitching was better, but the offense was more middle of the pack from August on than it was in the top 3 or 2 as it had been all year. So, I don't think that they really have shot there, but it just speaks to how good the offense was up through the first 4 months of the season.
Yeah, very, very well said. We'll see what happens with all of these awards, but certainly impressive for any team to have three individual players finish as finalists for the Silver Slugger. Pretty impressive stuff there. Yeah, again, we'll see how this turns out.
Where were we going to talk about those numbers I sent you?
Yeah, yeah. If I don't have graphics to show here,
That's okay. I'll just
but
go into it.
we can walk through those real quick. Yeah,
So the criteria, they look at OPS, OPS plus, home runs, things like that, and then the managers also vote on it. But for me, what I look at um, is WAR batting runs, right? So that's linear weights based, the value of a single, a double, a triple, a home run, and a walk in all of those events, along with their strikeouts and outs and double plays. And so, one of the things that I found really interesting, and I'm just going to read off a few numbers for you guys here. So, if you look first at shortstop, this is WAR batting runs. Geraldo Perdomo, 32.4, Francisco Lindor, 25, Trey Turner, 18.8. Those are sizable differences.
yeah,
I mean, I if you look at the total package of what Geraldo Perdomo bought, yes, Lindor had more home runs. Yes, Turner had a higher batting average. But if you look at the total package and the total balance, along with getting on base, getting all the base hits, driving in runs, RBIs, I don't see how anyone but Perdomo can win it. It should be an easy choice. It may not be. There's big market teams involved. There's a guy with a big homer total involved. It is called the Silver Slugger Award. So, I'm not ignoring that. But I do believe that Perdomo should be the easy choice there. Then you go over to the outfield. Juan Soto, clearly, 47.4. Number two is Corbin Carroll, 29.7. And then you have Tatis Jr. and Tucker essentially the same at 25.6 and 25.5. And then James Wood, who's one of the finalists, at 22.3. So I think that, Carroll should be a pretty easy number two in there. And then they just got to figure out who they want to go for number three. And then when you get to second base, it's not even close. Ketel
yeah.
Marte, 9.8, Bryce Terang, 18.4, Nico Horner, 7.2. I mean, that should be a landslide. So D-backs have a case to have all three guys take home the Silver Slugger.
Yeah, it feels like Ketel Marte could take home quite a few Silver Sluggers when all is said and done at second base in the National League. I just don't think there's anybody who really compares. Obviously, he won the award last year as well. Maybe there's a nice run of second base Silver Slugger awards to be had for him. Pretty impressive again, Jack, to have all these guys finish as finalists. And as you said, each of them has a pretty darn good case to win. We'll see what happens on that front. Well, if you've never bet on baseball before, you can do so with our friends over at DraftKings Sportsbook. The 2025 baseball season, of course, is down to what matters most, lifting the trophy. New customers, this one is for you. Bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get paid out $300 in bonus bets instantly. This is what October baseball is all about. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code FOUL. That's code FOUL to turn $5 into $300 in bonus bets if your bet wins. In partnership with DraftKings, the crown is yours. But before we get to the disclaimer, which I'll play here in a second, we have a pick that we want to share with all of you as well as the World Series comes into play. What do you got here, Jack?
I like Will Smith for the 1+ home run at plus 660. He hits right-handed pitching really well. He hit over 300 with plenty of power. I think 13 home runs against right-handed pitching. Trey Savage is actually a fly ball pitcher. You wouldn't know that by looking at his 14 major league innings this year in the regular season. But if you look at his minor league track record, and then he's reverted back to being a fly ball pitcher in the postseason. And Will Smith is one of the best Dodger hitters against fly ball pitchers. So that combination of factors, and Will Smith, he's doing okay. His batting average and on base in the postseason is really good. He hasn't hit for power yet. So I think he's due to pop one. Look, everyone's going to pick, Otani, but you're not going to make anything on it.
Yeah.
Whereas in this case, I think Will Smith's a good dark horse to kind of break out, hit a home run in this first game. There's some things that line up for him. So I like the bet at plus 660.
There you go. Well, as I said earlier, this is what October baseball is all about, and you can use code FOUL to turn $5 into $300 in bonus bets if your bet wins. In partnership with DraftKings, the crown is yours.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas, pass-through of per-wager tax may apply in Illinois. 21 and over. Age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. Restrictions apply. Bet must win to receive bonus bets which expire in 7 days. Minimum odds required. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.co/audio. Limited time offer.
We are back here on Snakes territory. Jack, I know you've been hard at work as usual, cooking some stuff up over at Arizona Diamondbacks on SI, trying to keep people engaged as we walk through the offseason. And something that I always find very helpful that you write every single year is a story about some of the key offseason dates, an offseason transaction calendar that people can be aware of. And there's a whole lot of dates in here that are pretty important that I'm not sure people really know about. So on the front end, I'd love to have you just kind of walk through and hit some of the highlights.
Yeah, from my time working in the front office, I got very much in tune with the calendar and the sequence of events and the things that you need to focus on as they come one by one down the pike. So it's just an area where I've always been really interested in to line it out and help crystallize thought processes. So one day after the World Series, 9 a.m. after the conclusion of the World Series, the earliest that might be is October 29th. The latest it would be November 2nd is when free agency starts. So eligible free agents under Rule XXB or 20B in CBA is those players with 6 or more years of service time are now free agents. And then the first 5 days after that are what they call the quiet period. So those free agents may only sign with their current organizations. After 5 days, free agents may then begin negotiations and sign with any team. So D-backs have 3 free agents: Zach Gallen, James McCann, Jalen Beeks. Those guys are all going to be free agents at 9 a.m. the day after the World Series is over. The trade market officially opens one day after the World Series is over as well. So then you go to day 5, and up through there are 3 options, qualifying offers, and opt-out decisions deadline. So that by day 5, those decisions need to be made. In the past, the Diamondbacks had lots of players with player options, club options, mutual options. They don't have that this year, actually. It's pretty clean as far as that's concerned. The qualifying offer, the D-backs, if they're going to make their qualifying offer to Zach Gallen, which they almost surely will, that must be done by the end of the day 5, which is the end of the quiet period. And then going forward from there, you also have opt-outs. Now, had Lourdes not gotten hurt, he may have been considering opting out of his contract. An opt-out and a player option is a different thing, but he probably will not exercise his opt-out. And then finally, and this is important, and we're going to circle back to this, teams must reinstate all players on the 60-day injured list to the 40-man roster. I think a lot of you are probably aware that, in order to open up space sometimes on the 40-man roster, a guy will be transferred to the 60-day IL. Well, all those guys, D-backs have 9 of them, need to be put back on, right? And again, that's a whole topic that we're going to get into, that they need to be put back onto the roster. And of course, the roster can't exceed 40 players. So there's a lot that goes into that. Then after that, November 10th starts a general managers meeting in Las Vegas. There's an owners meeting in November 18th to the 20th in New York. And that's going to be a pretty important date because this year, how committed the owners are to holding the line on a lockout if they don't get what they want in terms of a salary cap. We may have a little bit more indication of just how dug in they are there. I think, don't be surprised.
Yeah.
November 18th is the deadline for the players to either accept or reject their qualifying offer. And it's also a very important date from the team's standpoint because that's the deadline to add players to the 40-man roster who they want to protect from the Rule 5 draft. Okay, so that's another consideration on the 40-man. So if there's players that are Rule 5 eligible, minor league players that are not on the 40-man that the team doesn't want to leave unprotected in the Rule 5 draft, they got to put them on the roster by November 18th. Then November 21 is the tender deadline. So all those guys there's 11 players that are arbitration eligible. They all need to be tendered or contract by November 21. If anyone's non-tendered, that means they'll become a free agent. So in other words, if there was a player that the Diamondbacks decided they don't want to pay him arbitration wages, they don't think they're worth it, they're going to non-tender them and allow that player to go into free agency. Then there's the winter meetings, December 8th to 11th in Orlando, Florida. And what among interest, the Rule 5 draft takes place during the winter meetings, as does the MLB draft lottery. Then the last couple of items, December 15th, the international signing period closes. So for 2025. So if teams still had any budget allotment remaining and there was an international player they wanted to sign, they got to get that done before December 15th. Then the teams and arbitration eligible players that have not yet reached agreement will then exchange arbitration figures on January 8th. Okay, so something to keep in mind there. The D-backs have a file and trial type mentality. If they don't make a deal before that deadline and they decide to file for arbitration, they very seldom go back in and make an agreement before the trial. But they can make an agreement right up until the start of the hearing. Then finally, January 25th is the start of the new international signing period. And March 2nd through 11th, team may renew contracts of unsigned major league players under Rule 10. So if you have a pre-arbitration player and they think that they deserve a pretty hefty raise anyway, and the team doesn't want to give it to them, the team can make the decision to just pay them league minimum or marginally above league minimum. That's what they're referring to as renewing a contract. So that's the quick run through. You can find all of this information in an article I wrote. I published it on October 19th, Diamondbacks Guide to 2025-26 Offseason Transaction Calendar. You can find that on Arizona Diamondbacks on si.com/MLB/Diamondbacks. So go there, find that article and bookmark it. And then you'll, or put those dates into your phone calendar and you'll be able to follow along with everybody what's going on during the off season. You won't be surprised by developments.
There you go. Good stuff. Yeah, I mean, we'll certainly have more conversations about some of these things along the way. Obviously, the winter meetings, we'll be having all sorts of conversations about what the rumors are that are circulating there, and then once we get closer to a couple of the deadlines you mentioned, Jack, the Rule 5 draft, we'll have a more in-depth conversation about who the D-backs might want to protect there. I think there are some names. And then as far as the tender deadline, they have a couple of guys that you could argue, are non-tender candidates. So we'll have those discussions coming up here soon. But I want to narrow in, Jack, on what you referenced earlier, which is the fact that they have a roster crunch coming not too far away. Right, this is day 5 after the World Series, the end of the quiet period, where the Diamondbacks have to add all of those guys, all 9 of them that you mentioned that they put on the 60-day IL. All those guys have to come back to the 40-man roster, which means that they're going to have to remove some guys who are currently on the 40-man roster as part of that process.
Yeah.
Jack, yeah. What were you going to say there?
So simple math, right? You have 39 guys currently on the 40-man roster. You drop 3 when they become free agents, Zach Gallen, McCann, and Jalen Beeks. So that's 36. You add 9, that gets you to 45.
Right.
So at the very least, by the end of the 5-day quiet period, they will need to cull down 5 players off the 40-man roster. Now, later on, they're going to have to go even further than that if they want to add anybody for the Rule 5 to protect from the Rule 5 draft, but we're not there yet. That's a little further down the road. So what I looked at here was, okay, of those, not once those 9 guys who are Corbin Burns, Kevin Ginkel, Tommy Henry, Justin Martinez, Christian Mena, Christian Montes de Oca, AJ Puck, Blake Walston, and Pavin Smith. Those are the 9 guys that have to be reinstated.
Yeah.
So once you reinstate those 9, that brings you to 45. So who are the players most likely to have to be removed? This is speculation on my part. I do not have inside information. This is just my guessing or using an informed guess, if you want to say. But don't anyone mistake this for inside info, because it's not. But higher probability outright candidates might be Elvin Rodriguez, Gus Varland. Unfortunately, Kyle Nelson, who just had a really rough season, and infielder Connor Kaiser, who was brought up and then never played. So that's 4 right there that I think are pretty high likelihoods. And then at least one more player from the following list is likely to be removed: John Curtis, Casey Kelly, Tommy Henry, Austin Pope, and Taylor Rashi, along with infielder Ildemar Vargas. By the way, there's a lot of confusion about Vargas. He is under team control for 1 more year. If they want him, he's arbitration eligible. So, Nelson, Kyle Nelson, John Curtis, and Vargas are all arbitration eligible players, and they're going to earn more than the league minimum. So that could be something that they factor in when making these decisions, because they are also under a dollar crunch, as we've discussed before. They're cutting payroll. So that's kind of the first things, if we look at the first things that are going to happen immediately after the World Series is over, you have 3 guys turning free agents, and then within 5 days, you have to add 9 guys. Now, the process for all of this is they put the guys on waivers. And if they clear waivers, then they outright them. So that's why they call it outright waivers. And there's a whole segment of another article over on our website that explains that full procedure and how that works. So, but outright waivers is the process that is used to clear players through waivers and then allow them to outright them to the minor leagues.
So just to be super clear, if the D-backs were to do that with one of these guys, it doesn't guarantee that they are out of the organization.
Correct.
It just means that if they don't clear, then they would be out of the organization. But if they clear, then you would have the opportunity to outright them to the minors. And then they could continue to be in the organization.
Right. Now, I mean, players with more than 5 years major league service time could reject the assignment.
Sure.
And players with more than 3 years of major league service time who have previously been outrighted may reject the outright assignment in favor of free agency in lieu of the assignment. So, there's some complicating factors there. Again, this is all kind of explained on the website, that might result in it. So we don't know exactly how all of the, the money factors, who's been outrighted before, who the Diamondbacks really want to keep no matter what, who they're more willing to let go of. We don't, I'm not sitting in their offices listening to them go through all of these factors. So there's a long list of players. Some may be no longer with the organization, or some may be outrighted off the 40-man roster and remain in the organization with the Reno Aces.
The last thing I'll say about this, Jack, is I think just big picture, this is something the D-backs do every year. It's not specific to this offseason, although it's a little more interesting this offseason because they have so many guys on the 60-day that they have to add to the 40-man. I think big picture, Jack, the depth on this 40-man roster is frankly not awesome. And so these decisions that the D-backs are having to make, they're going to be tough decisions. And I mean, these are all real human beings, right? I mean, I don't want to belittle the impact that these kinds of decisions would have for all those people. But big picture, the Diamondbacks are there. I think there are going to be other teams with harder decisions to make, players that you really wouldn't want to lose that maybe you have to. I'm not sure the D-backs are in a position where there's all sorts of guys that you'd love to be able to keep around as depth that you don't have the ability to. Unfortunately, that was an issue in the organization that was very much exposed throughout this past season. They didn't have the depth that they needed when those frontline guys got hurt. And so, yeah, I mean, that unfortunately, that's I don't think these decisions are going to be what maybe you would have liked them to be if you were in a better spot.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, a lot of the second line got hurt too,
Yeah, right.
especially
Yeah,
in the bullpen side. But yeah, for sure. I mean, the fact that they have so many guys coming in off the 60-day is one thing. That's a long list. The fact that there's a fairly long list of players that they could or will consider removing from the roster without feeling like they're giving up the farm is also quite telling.
yeah. Yeah, very fair. Well, again, that's just day 5 after the World Series ends, so we're not all that far away from these decisions coming down the pipeline. So you can certainly count on us here at Snakes Territory to break all of them down once we know a little bit more on that front. We have one more topic to get to on this show. Amiel Sawdaye, some news relating to the D-backs assistant general manager. We will get to that on the other side of this break. Well, as we've been talking about throughout much of this episode, the moment that you've all been waiting for has arrived. The World Series, of course, Diamondbacks not involved, but still a big event. The two teams take the field, but only one will leave a champion. Every swing could change the game. Every play could make history, and you can stream the World Series live over on Fox One. Of course, Jack, the first game is going to be on Friday night. I believe we have pitching matchups at this point. I think I saw Yamamoto against Trey Yasevich, as you were talking about earlier.
That's correct.
Yeah.
I'm
So
sorry,
Trey.
Blake Snell. Blake Snell's pitching the first game.
Okay. So it's Blake Snell for game 1, and then you're right. Then Yamamoto for game 2 for the Los Angeles Dodgers. So should be fun to watch. I mean, even though the Diamondbacks are not involved, the Dodgers are, and that instantly means that again, D-backs fans sort of know who they're cheering for, I think, in this series. I think it'll be really interesting, Jack, to see what the Dodgers pitching looks like against the Blue Jays. I don't want to say the Brewers offense is terrible because it's not, but the Blue Jays offense I think is considerably better. They have star power, they have George Springer, they have Vladimir Guerrero Jr., and they also have a lot of depth in their lineup that the Milwaukee Brewers just did not have. So I wonder what it could look like if the Blue Jays are able to knock out some of these Dodgers starters earlier in games. And then at that point, you're getting into that Dodgers bullpen that we really expected would be an issue in the postseason. Up to this point, it hasn't been because their starters are all going like 6 or 7 innings every single time.
Yeah, and unfortunately for the Dodgers, and especially for Alex Vesia and his family, just before we started recording this episode, news came out that Alex Vesia would not be available because he has a family issue, apparently quite a serious one,
Mm,
um, and that him and his wife have to deal with. And so I don't know the details of what that is. Just all the best thoughts go out to Alex Vesia. From a performance standpoint on the field, that's a loss for the Dodgers bullpen and weakens them further in the area that they could least afford to be weakened. And Roki Sasaki, I mean, he's going to have to continue to be lights out, closing out games and finishing out games. But like you said, if the starters don't keep going 6-7 innings, they really could be in trouble there. Um,
mm,
the flip side of that is the Blue Jays pitching staff is pretty tired, even though they've had a few days off here.
yeah.
They're not as well rested as the Dodgers pitching staff, so the bats may really have their way. They didn't score a lot during their playoff run so far, so I have a sneaky feeling that Dodger bats are going to wake up here.
Mm. Yeah, very fair point. I guess the flip side of the argument I made earlier is that the Blue Jays pitching staff is not exactly perfect, and the Dodgers offense is very good. So maybe we have some high scoring games ahead of us. Will be interesting to see what happens. Of course, you can take in all of the World Series action with our friends over at Fox One. Start your free 7-day free trial today. Offers are subject to change. Go to Fox One for complete terms and conditions. Well, Jack, I mentioned it earlier. Our final topic here on this episode has to do with Amiel Sawdaye, longtime Diamondbacks assistant general manager under Mike Hazen. He reportedly is a finalist for the Rockies general manager job that recently opened up. Not the first time we've heard Amiel Sawdaye's name floated out there as an option for another team. I have long suspected that eventually another organization would pry him away. Hasn't happened up to this point. The Rockies job, Jack, is especially interesting because well, the Rockies are just a bit of a different organization, shall we say? They just seem to operate a little bit differently. Their front office has not exactly been highly regarded in recent years. And if I'm Amiel Sawdaye, Jack, I am asking every question, leaving trying to get all the information I can about exactly what authority I would be given in this job. I think that is a massive question for anyone thinking about being the Rockies GM.
While I think Amiel's been mentioned as a potential GM candidate for quite a number of years, I don't ever think he's been a finalist for one.
Yeah.
And there's only 30 of these positions. And I have to think that unless he doesn't, feel comfortable at all with the amount of autonomy he would get, he's got to take it. I mean, there's nowhere to go from. They just lost 119 games. There's nowhere to go but up. I mean, if you got that team back to 500 within a couple of years, you're executive of the year.
Yeah.
So I mean, there is nowhere to go but up as far as that organization's concerned. So I think it would be pretty cool. It would be tough for the D-backs to lose him,
Yeah.
especially to a division rival who he'll probably make better. Then there's always the question of who he might take with him, who the Diamondbacks would allow him to take with him. There's all sorts of agreements, handshakes, whatever that can be made around that. I don't know how much they formalize it. Obviously, the D-backs gave the Rockies permission to talk to him because it's an upward move, not a lateral move. A lot of times teams will deny other clubs from the talking to one of their people if it's a lateral move. But if it's an upward move, they almost always say, yes, go for it. They're not going to hold him back. So interesting times. We'll see what happens with it. There's at least one other finalist. I think is Matt Foreman. Matt Foreman is the other finalist that we know of for sure. There could be others, but the thing here is they're going outside the organization. So I got a feeling that since they're not promoting from within and they're going outside the organization, they're recognizing the need to do it completely different than what they've done before.
Yeah. Yeah, and I really am curious the dynamics with it being a divisional team. If the D-backs were more hesitant to give permission for this, if that didn't factor in at all. I mean, Amiel Sawdaye would make the Rockies a lot better, I think. And a part of that is that I do think very highly of Amiel Sawdaye. You and I have both gotten to interact with him a fair
Absolutely.
bit the past few years. He's a great guy on a personal level. He has a long track record of being a well-respected front office member. But part of my thinking on this is also that the Rockies, I mean, what they've been the past few years has just been an utter disaster. And if you go from utter disaster to Amiel Sawdaye, I mean, I think that is a pretty darn big upgrade. And I wonder if the D-backs wouldn't want to be helping out a team that they're playing 13 times every season to that extent. But I guess on the flip side, like, okay, if it is an Amiel Sawdaye, the Rockies maybe would just get some other front office person who would also make them a lot better. And maybe at that point, the D-backs are just willing to go out there and as you said earlier, give him an opportunity since it's an upward move.
Yeah, I mean, basically, they can't say no to the Rockies' request to speak with Amiel. They can't. What they can say no to is, agreeing for like him to take anybody from the D-backs organization for 1 to 2 to 3 years or whatever.
Sure.
So, and I think it's important to kind of remember a little bit about Amiel's background. I mean, he's very heavily ensconced in the Red Sox minor league development back in his Red Sox days, and the directors of minor league organizations, they kind of report into Amiel. He's still very much heavily involved in that. He's not a scout at this point, but I think that you look at a team like the Rockies, where player development is going to be ultimately important. I think that Amiel will definitely bring a lot to the table. From that standpoint, of course, he understands all the, transactional rules and all of that as well. Just an extremely intelligent, like you said, a good guy. I've enjoyed almost every interaction I've ever had with him. I think he's always been very professional and at the same time, a warm, friendly person. So I think he'll do great. I think that he's got a great reputation, and I wish him the best of luck. I hope he gets it, honestly.
Well, on that note, that is everything we have for this edition of Snakes Territory. We really appreciate all of you being here with us along the way. If you haven't already, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Make sure you sign up for notifications as well for our channel here if you haven't done that already. Drop a like on this video. That really helps us out. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you thought of any of the many topics we hit on this episode. If you're joining us over on an audio-only platform, we'd also really appreciate it if you'd leave us a 5-star review over there. You can find me on Twitter at Jesse N. Friedman. You can find Jack at ShoeWizard59. Our show is at Snakes Territory. And as we referenced throughout much of this episode as well, you can find Jack's written work over at si.com/MLB/Diamondbacks. Thanks again to all of you for being with us on this episode. We really appreciate it. And we'll be back with another edition of Snakes Territory very, very soon.